Looks like people are still joining. All right. Well, it looks like it's just about 1 o'clock, according to my watch, so we may as well get started. Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. We'll be speaking today about Mayor John Hamilton's Recover Forward initiative. In fact, one aspect of it in particular. The initiative seeks to rebuild the community in a more equitable way as it recovers from the current public health and economic crisis. Today, we'll be discussing the actions that the city is taking to cultivate and sustain racial equity across the community by more thoroughly building it into city systems and fostering a culture of inclusion throughout Bloomington. I'm City of Bloomington Communications Director Yael Cassander, and joining us today are Bloomington Mayor John Hamilton, also City of Bloomington Community and Family Resources Director Beverly Calender-Anderson, Bloomington Police Chief Mike Diekhoff, and Bloomington City Council member Jim Sims, who chairs the council's Public Safety Committee. Just a note on our format today, we will be taking questions from the audience, starting with the media, after each of our panelists shares an update today. So let's get started. We will begin with Mayor Hamilton, who's going to set the stage for us today.
Thanks so much. Can you all hear me all right? Make sure the connections are okay. And I think we'll ask folks to mute probably as you're not speaking if you can, just to help the sound quality. Thank everybody for being here. Thank Yael Cassander for emceeing, if you will, Councilmember Sims, Chief Diekhoff, Director Calender-Anderson, and all of you who are participating. I just want to frame briefly, and then I'll be one of 3 presenters too as we go through some topics. Our city and our community are committed to a culture of equity and inclusion and connectedness. We have seen the recent engagement of millions and millions of people around the country and thousands of people in our own community around the issue of racial justice, calling for it, enough is enough, Black Lives Matter, many calls for racial justice in that wider picture of equity, inclusion, and connectedness. We also know our history as a country, as a community, the deep current of racism that has been part of our country and community, and that is still present in our community and our country. And as Ms. Cassander mentioned, the program of recovering forward, of moving through the health challenge, the pandemic, the economic calamity that has accompanied it, we've been talking about how to recover forward in the ways that we want to move our community not backwards to what we were before the pandemic, but forward into a better future. And one major pillar of that is focused on racial justice and addressing, combating racial injustice. And those reflect our community values. I want to just quote, I couldn't help losing, as we did, a great civil rights leader and advocate of John Lewis. He had an op-ed published posthumously. If you haven't read it, it's in today's paper. I saw it in the New York Times. It may be in others. It's a beautiful and powerful statement that he wrote just briefly before he died. And I just want to quote briefly from part of that wonderful op-ed. And it says, quote, "Democracy is not a state. It is an act. And each generation must do its part to help build what we called the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself." Close quote. I love democracy is an act, as anti-racism is an act, a series of acts. There's a lot of very good work that has been done by very good people toward anti-racism in our community, in our country. We've seen efforts you're going to hear more about from divided communities and anti-racism efforts locally. And today, what we're going to do is talk about Recover Forward and this particular pillar, this particular focus of anti-racism. You're first going to hear from Ms. Calender-Anderson talking at kind of at the highest level about anti-racism, structural racism, some of the work that's been done on that, and some of the plans to work on that more directly in the future at that highest, broadest level of structural racism that we still face and need to work on. Second, I'll speak briefly, then kind of centering in on public safety and policing, talk about some of the longer term plans of reviews, considerations about steps we might take in regard to that as we zero in on the public safety piece of the impacts of racism in our community and our society. And then third, you'll hear from Chief Diekhoff about even some more particular plans outlining where we're headed in this year's budget and some steps that have already been taken place for that. As well, we're so pleased to have Councilmember Sims with us to provide perspective and views that he brings both as a current council member and from his other responsibilities in the community. So that's just a little bit of framing, and I'll hand it back to you, Ms. Cassander. Thank you.
Oh, technology. I am just going to pass the baton over to Ms. Calender-Anderson, the Director of the Community and Family Resources Department for the City of Bloomington.
Just saw you do it. But thank you, Yael, and thank you, Mayor Hamilton. So I've lived in Bloomington for about 22 years, and for as long as I've lived in this community, it has been very proud of its diversity. And a lot of that is brought by Indiana University. And we are a community that has a diverse population when you count numbers. I think the inclusion part of that has been more of a struggle for Bloomington, but I know that the city has worked hard over the past years that I've been around, especially in the Community and Family Resources Department, where we provide staff for the Commission on the Status of Black Males, the Commission on the Status of Women, the Commission on Hispanic and Latino Affairs, Children and Youth, Aging, as well as the Council for Community Accessibility. And so when we talk about equity and justice issues, we're looking at them very broadly, race being one of them. But as the mayor said, we do have a history of racial division, not only in our state, but also in our community. I think the issues of our issues as a city, big C city, with justice and inclusion came to light last summer. And so when that began to happen, we consulted with the Divided Communities Project at the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law that the mayor referred to. And if people don't know, the goal of the Divided Community Project is to help strengthen communities by finding collaborative approaches for transforming division into action. So it recognizes that there are areas of division, but it tries to give communities those tools and resources to come together and act. And through the Divided Communities Project, which I'll just call DCP, Bridge Initiative, consultants visited Bloomington. They met several times with a wide variety of community members to assess our community's points of contention related to equity. They also spoke by phone and took written comments from people that they weren't able to meet with. And in December, they published a report with recommendations for ways our community might be able to move forward. Then in March of this year, Bloomington was selected as one of 5 cities to participate in DCP's Academy initiative. And the Academy is co-sponsored by DCP with the American Bar Association's section of dispute resolution, with the goal of capacity building and support and strengthening for the development of a core leadership convener group for participating communities, and providing planning opportunities for that core leadership group, to address issues in their own community. So it wasn't like they were coming into our community to fix a problem, but it was giving us the tools to recognize issues and gather our resources within the community to begin to work on our own issues. And so Bloomington had a team of 8. There were 3 staff and 5 community members that attended the academy in Chicago. And one of the things that we walked away with was a set of goals. So at this point, we have a set of recommendations from the Bridge Initiative and then a set of goals from the academy that we were beginning to move forward on. And then coronavirus hit us. And unfortunately, because of that, it slowed some of our work down, but not all of it. And so we have gotten back to working on that with the still team of 8 and the larger community. And we've looked at those recommendations and goals and working with that core leadership group that participated at the academy. We are starting to pull together a comprehensive plan for racial equity and justice. And I think that we took it very much into consideration those recommendations from the community that were related to us by the Bridge Initiative. Also, some of the mayor's commitments and goals and our administration's recommendations. And so some of the highlights from the plan, and although the plan is not formally, it's not finalized, some of the things we have began to work on. We will be doing an anti-racism training for city elected officials and department heads and city council members. That was one of our DCP recommended goals. And then an implicit bias training for all of our frontline and management staff. Yesterday and today, many of our staff are participating in a de-escalation training. And so when they come up against situations that are becoming escalated, whether verbal, hopefully only verbally, they will have the tools and resources they need to bring that temperature down some. We are also developing a community-wide and community-led racial justice task force that is in the works. We're looking at, I'm sorry, I had to look at my notes again. Looking at a racial equity impact assessment, and that will be a list of components that every department, not just CFRD, not just police, but every department looks at when it's developing programs, when it's developing its budget, to say, are we reaching all of the communities that we need to reach? Are we doing this in an equitable way and in a just way? And so we always want to keep justice at the forefront of what we're doing, and also equity. So those are some of the highlights of that. The Racial Justice Task Force, I didn't say this, but they will help shine a light on the things in the community that we may not be seeing as an administration. And so because it's community-led and community-run, community-led and has community members in it, they are more likely to see some of the issues that are bubbling up, maybe even before people in City Hall or on City Council do. And of course, we're going to continue to do the things that we've always done. We're going to continue to staff our commissions and address those diverse demographics that I talked about earlier. Our Latino outreach program, which addresses the needs of our Latino and Hispanic members of the community, will continue to do its work. And so, as I sort of bring this to a close, I'll just say, we didn't get to where we are in race relations overnight. And so we also realize that there's no magic wand that's going to fix it overnight. But I think by equipping ourselves with tools and resources that can help us address discrimination and help us address racism, and having that commitment, not only the commitment from staff, but the commitment from our elected officials, and the commitment from our community to continue working on this and to listen to one another, then we can make Bloomington better, and hopefully engaging as many community members as possible in the process. So, thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. That's a great summary of a whole lot of history. I'm sure that the media will have questions for you about that
Oh, I'm
when
sure
we
they
get
will.
to that point in the program. I think we were going to segue back to the mayor to provide a bit of transition to some of our public safety efforts.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Calender-Anderson, for that. I think hearing the news of the plan for a citywide task force focused really on structural racism, I think is a very important step. I congratulate I know you and Chief Diekhoff and Mary Catherine Carmichael from the city, along with 5 city residents I know participating in that. I really appreciate that effort, and as you said, leading to, as we hope it will, to a community-led task force looking at the structural racism issues in education, and kind of choosing among education and criminal justice and public health and the economy and wealth and jobs and agriculture and all kinds of areas that group can try to wrestle with and help us take actions on. And one particular area that has, of course, been very front of mind and very active lately has been the issue of public safety and the legacies of racism there, the challenges of a belonging community, a beloved community. And within that wider world of structural racism issues to address and to act upon in the city, I want to talk just a minute about some of the particular area of public safety and police that we are interested in pursuing in one particular way. And then after I share this, Chief Diekhoff can talk more directly, even at the kind of granular level, about some of the plans at the Bloomington Police Department. But so in that umbrella of overall structural racism review, with the spotlight on public safety and policing, many of you probably know the role of the Board of Public Safety, and that is a group of 5 residents, all residents of Bloomington. It's a very diverse group that has the state statutory responsibility to oversee our department of our fire department and our police department. And I believe our community needs and will benefit from a kind of a longer term deliberate review discussion of the issues of public safety, kind of the long-term design questions and goals and approaches, and done in a way with broad input from the city residents, led by residents of the city, to help think about, it can't be done really in a month or 2, but over a period of numerous months, to really try to think about the future of our public safety efforts. So I am today announcing that I'm going to ask the Board of Public Safety, those 5 residents who oversee public safety efforts now, to create an advisory committee on public safety review, to pick individuals who represent our community and viewpoints and expertise, to form an advisory committee to that 5-member board that will report to them their study, at least some of it by next summer. It may be they want to do longer, but at least to have some short-term results within 6 or 9 months, 9 months, I suppose, by next summer, really to think about what should our public safety efforts look like in the longer term. What components should there be of our public safety efforts? What allocations of resources to various components, learning from models that are around our country, our state, our world, about how to do the best we can be, building on what is a very progressive and creative current Bloomington Police Department that has taken many steps already that many communities now are evaluating and considering. But to have wide open discussions, to welcome viewpoints, to be a forum where people can share those views together, with thought and with research and with deliberation. We are all, as Ms. Calender-Anderson said, this is a long-standing issue. It's not going to be solved overall, structural racism, and certainly the piece of structural racism that is part of our public safety history is something we've paid a lot of attention to in this community, but it is absolutely the right thing to do a deliberate review of where we are, what should our public safety efforts look like 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, and to have that wider community discussion. So I'm announcing today that I am going to ask the Board of Public Safety to create that advisory committee of some set of members that will report to them no later than next summer, at least with a round of reports. I expect the report can inform the Board of Public Safety. I expect it may inform City Council too, if there are actions the City Council wants to review. It will certainly inform the City Administration. I hope it may inform community partners, so many of whom work together on issues of public safety, and really inform our whole community. So there may be stages of recommendations, but I'd like to see at least a first stage by next summer. So I wanted to let people know that I will be asking the Board of Public Safety. I am asking them to create that advisory committee to continue this community dialogue that is so important. And I'll hand it back to you.
Right. Well, that's a big announcement. Also, it's really important to make note of a lot of the policies and trainings that are already underway and have been underway for a number of years in the Bloomington Police Department. Chief Diekhoff, could you tell us about some of those things and some of the changes that are presently happening?
Sure. So in the current debate on policing, there have been a lot of discussion about use of force and de-escalation and policies and what those policies contain. And I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we've already done and some changes that we've made. So with regards to, there's been discussions about duty to report and duty to intervene, and we've had that implied in police department policies for years, but we just recently strengthened that and made it very apparent that that is what is required of officers. And we put that in our general orders. We also, at the last Board of Safety meeting, changed a rule and regulation and had the Board of Safety approve that also required an officer to intervene in an excessive force situation and report those instances to supervisors. So those, as I said, they were implied in policies, but it wasn't. We felt it wasn't direct enough, so we've updated our policies to reflect that and require officers to do that. Other things that we have done, we've not used chokeholds in the past, and so those have been banned. We had done some training on vascular neck restraints, but those have now been banned. So that is in our policies also now. Those have been updated to ban the use of any kind of chokehold. So those are just a couple of things that those have had a lot of discussion. Some other things that we've brought to the forefront. There's been some discussion about different policy measures. One of those is 8 can't wait, and it is 8 recommendations that are made so that it lessens the potential for people to get hurt or killed by the police. And I'll go through some of those real quick. And we've done these for many years and had these in policies. One is banning chokeholds. One's requiring de-escalation training. One is requiring warning before shooting. Another is exhausting all alternatives before shooting. Another one is a duty to intervene. Another one is ban shooting at vehicles. Another is establish a use of force continuum. And last is require all force be reported. we do all of those now. We have done those for many years. There's a lot of talk about use of force policies and de-escalation. Our policy, we have our use of force and de-escalation policy. It's a circle, and you, depending upon the situation, there's always de-escalation efforts are always required in any type of force that we use. So it's a constant evaluation of what the situation is and how you can de-escalate that situation. Some other things I'd just like to touch on. We are a nationally accredited law enforcement agency. There are less than 5% of the police departments nationwide who are accredited through CALEA, which is the Commission on Law Enforcement Accreditation. And what that is it is a lot of policy where we're required every year to review and update policies in order to maintain that accreditation. And those are nationwide best practice police policies. And again, as I said, we are one of less than 5% of the agencies in the United States are accredited. And we are one of those. We've created different programs over the years to try to address different situations in our community that we've seen increases in. One of those is people who experience homelessness or who might be experiencing a mental health issue. We train all of our officers in CIT, which is critical incident training, and that is a de-escalation technique that is used in people who are in some kind of mental health crisis. We also have trained all of our officers in mental health first aid. We established our downtown resource officer program, and that is a group of officers whose basic responsibility is to respond to people who might be in a health crisis, respond to people who might be experiencing homelessness. And we have many social service agencies in the community that we partner with, and that we actually even provide grant money to partner with us, to provide outreach workers, to provide housing, to provide job training skills, so that we can kind of break that cycle of homelessness or get them the mental health treatment that they might need. We also last year added a police social worker. We were one of the first agencies in the state to do so. We've had body cams for many years. We record every interaction that our officers have with citizens that they might be dealing with. And again, that's so that we can be transparent. If there's any kinds of problems or complaints, we have video evidence that we can review to see what happened in that situation. We last year created a program called the Neighborhood Resource Specialist, where we have non-sworn personnel dealing with minor nuisance type calls. So again, just another step to try to think of different ways to resolve a lot of the problems that we encounter every day. One of the last things I'd like to touch on is you may have heard discussions about the Stride Center. The Stride Center is going to be opening hopefully sometime in August. But what it is it's a 24-hour-a-day crisis center, so that if we encounter people at any time of the day, but mostly after normal business hours, we will have a place that will be staffed with professionals who can respond to individuals who might be experiencing some kind of mental health crisis or some kind of addictions or substance use crisis, where that's a much better alternative than taking someone to jail. We have not had that resource in the community in the past, and so that just is another tool that we will have to try to help people who may have had some kind of minor interaction with law enforcement, and it's not appropriate to get them into the criminal justice system. It's a treatment system, and so we can take people and drop them off at that center, and treatment professionals that can take over and try to address the root causes of what might be causing their issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief Diekhoff. So lastly, I would like to invite Councilman Sims to speak, who is the chair of the council's Public Safety Committee and also has had experience on the Board of Public Safety, among other things. So welcome to the discussion.
Thank you. I saw two others do it and I failed to do it myself. Thank you, Yael. I'm glad to see you, Chief Diekhoff, Ms. Calender-Anderson, and yourself, Mayor. I am glad earlier that the Mayor acknowledged, and I would be remiss not to do so, is to acknowledge the final homegoing celebration today for Congressman John Lewis, being held in the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. And that not only was his spiritual home, but it was also the home of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So may he rest in peace. Thank you for those words. Not only am I the City Council Vice President, Chair of the Council's Public Safety Standing Committee, one of 3 at-large members. I am also the immediate past president of the NAACP of Monroe County. Have been involved in many social justice and community service organizations. In doing all those things, I'm not here today, in essence, representing the City Council. But like my colleagues, I am a resource to this legislative body. So I am here to listen today, as much as anything. I'm hearing a lot from our community members, a lot of people out in our community. Again, I'm here to listen. I'll give input when needed. But one of the things I'm hearing already that we're going to address, some policy level structural change, change in racism practices and policies. I've also often said you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you can listen twice as much as you talk. When we speak, or when I do speak, I'm all about improving the condition of humanity, specifically for Black and brown people impacted by white supremacist ideologies and the systemic racist practices in which many of us endure. I and my council members, we listen, we try to do what we can, and that will be more, I do believe, as we move forward, to make this a better city, make it a more fair, more just, more inviting, more inclusive city. One of the focuses that I have is the culture of many of the organizations. We'll talk about law enforcement, and there'll be individual parts of that we'll discuss, that Chief will. I am also focusing on the overall culture of law enforcement that has been pervasive across this entire country and in our history. Many of those we have adjusted, we have changed, we have recognized in the city of Bloomington. Can we do better? Yes, we can, and yes, we will. But many of those we have dealt with, we have tried to make better, we're in the improvement mode. So I am happy to be here today. Looking forward to hearing to many of the questions that I'm quite sure you 3 will answer. I am available if need be, and thanks for inviting me today.
Thank you so much, Councilman Sims. We do indeed have a number of questions from the media here. And I think I'd like to begin with one that looks like it's for Chief Diekhoff. And this one comes from Emily Ernsberger from the HT, who asks, in the Recover Forward speech, Mayor Hamilton called for non-badged positions, similar to social workers and the downtown resource officers. What specific positions are you hoping to create and hire for? And why should such jobs stay within the police department as opposed to forming a separate public safety department for such positions?
So the discussions I've had with the mayor about creating new positions, we're asking in the budget request to add to our neighborhood resource specialist program and add a couple of positions there. We're also asking to add some more in our to our social worker team. you know, we are a 24-hour-a-day agency, 7 days a week. So we are one of the few city departments that is always out working. I've been asked that before about creating specialized teams, and there's been discussions nationwide about taking away the responsibility of police departments to respond to calls with people who might have you know, a mental health issue, or who might be experiencing homelessness. And the problem with that is we get these calls 24 hours a day. And, you know, as with the stride discussions that we've been having over the last year and a half, you know, that was one of the things that we talked about, was we don't have a resource in the middle of the night to take someone to if there's an issue. And so again, we get called all the time. And so unless we have 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, that ability for someone to respond to deal with something, then it still falls back to us. And so I think right now it makes a lot of sense to keep those programs in the police department, because we are out there every day. We have one social worker right now, but we have officers on night shift that are always sending referrals to her and sending her emails about, hey, we interacted with this person. You know, can you reach out to them and see what you can do to help? So I think adding to those positions, you know, I've discussed a little bit with the mayor about, with the neighborhood resource specialist, about maybe changing how we use that so that they might respond to more minor type calls that would free up sworn officers to focus on more serious stuff. But I think the big part is getting that program with the social worker program and the DROs all kind of coordinating and working together. I think that will give us a greater ability to partner with more social service agencies that have that expertise, other types of like Centerstone agencies that have experts that can deal with those types of things, so that, again, I mentioned this earlier, we can break the cycle that's causing these problems and get them into treatment options, so that there is less chance for there to be an interaction with law enforcement.
Thanks. I might jump in too in regard to the question. First, and I want to emphasize again, our police department has been doing so much creative work. The members of the police department and partners of theirs throughout the community to take many of the steps that have been talked about in many places. We're not done with that, and we continue to invest in it. One thing I do want to share with the media and is news is the budget proposal that we're going to be sending to council in just a couple weeks. We'll ask to reallocate some funding from 5 sworn officer positions to reallocate funding into new at least five of these positions in the neighborhood resource specialist, social worker, maybe a data and public connection analyst as well. But we are currently funded at 105 sworn officers, and we're going to reallocate 5 of those sworn positions into these other new positions. The current population of the badged officers is 95, and we're going to continue to recruit at the very high standards that we do to make sure we have the resources on the street. Now, I do want to also just very briefly mention the question of where should these individuals, and if we change and continue to evolve, where should they be? I think I agree with Chief Diekhoff's description of the expansion of capacities, but those are questions that are very ripe for the longer term community discussions. I think to think about the evolution of the police department, which has evolved a lot over the last 10 years and will likely continue to evolve, but to try to help think about those are very difficult to do in a month or 2 or 3. It takes a lot of thought and deliberation and wide open input. So we'll look forward to those kinds of questions being part of both the structural racism, anti-racism task force community-wide that Ms. Calender-Anderson mentioned, as well as the specific advisory committee on public safety under the Board of Public Safety that I've mentioned. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And we do have a lot of ground to cover here, a lot of questions from the media and from the public. This probably goes back to Beverly Calender-Anderson. We have a question from Benta Boutier of WFIU, also from Emily from the HT, asking who will be providing the anti-racism training? What is the city response to B-Town BLM's offer to provide the training? And yes, please.
Go ahead. Okay. So our Human Resources Department, which is responsible for staff training, sent out published a request for qualifications last week. So for providers. And so we're looking at providers to do the training. And we have spoken with the core council of Black Lives Matter Bloomington, and certainly encourage them to complete the form, but it's just the process that the department goes through in order to acquire providers on that level. So at this moment, we don't know who's going to be providing the training, but we'd certainly like to work with Black Lives Matter if we could.
Sorry, the rain is getting loud. Now this is another question for Chief Diekhoff from Benta Boutier. How was the duty to intervene strengthened or made more clear, as you described earlier?
We put specific language that said exactly that if an officer, excuse me, if an officer witnessed excessive force by not only a member of our agency, but any other law enforcement agency, that they had a duty to intervene and stop the excessive force and then report it to a supervisor.
Okay, thank you. This question comes from the B-Square Beacon. And the question is, currently every ordinance that's enacted by the city council needs to get 2 readings at 2 separate meetings before it can become local law. That's just part of the local code. So here's an idea: change the local code to add another reading for every ordinance. So we would have a first reading, then an anti-racist reading, and then finally 3rd reading, all at separate meetings of the full city council. The single focus of the discussion for the anti-racist reading of an ordinance would be, how is this anti-racist? Council Member Sims, is that the kind of legislative process that you would be willing to consider adopting? And then there are questions for the others too.
Well, thank you for the question. I can see adopting something similar to that. I mean, not maybe exactly that way. One of the things with the council calendar, with regard to adding another reading and extending, is that Bloomington is a growing city. So there is much more legislation within the last several years than there has been in the past. So managing the council calendar is a challenge in and of itself. Now, having said that, it's very important for community input and comment. At this point, I think the current statutory code or local code that we operate under is adequate to get proper community input and comment. Is that something I'd be willing to discuss with my colleagues? It sure is. I also think with regard to discussing the anti-racist culture change, for lack of a better term, I think I'd like to get to the point where every legislation that we deal with has already been vetted through that lens, as opposed to maybe doing it every meeting and thus extending our calendar and probably doing some of the other community a disfavor by not making enough time in order to get to other issues. But I understand, I think I understand what I'm reading or what I heard, and that is something I would welcome discussing, in particularly with changing the culture, which we've operated, say, for years.
All right, thank you. In response to that same proposal from the B-Square Beacon, Mayor Hamilton, you are asked to include a separate anti-racist reading, the administration would have to adjust to a normal legislative rhythm that takes 1 month for every ordinance. Is that something you would be willing to do?
Well, I'll join my colleague in city government and council member Sims in first of all, the mayor is always careful to tell the council how they should conduct their business. I don't mean they may want to, however they want to structure their legislative business is their prerogative. I would say maybe I should say this, and I don't think I said it as directly as I should. Recover forward in this focus on moving our community into a future that reflects our values, rather than thinking we have to recover back to what we were before. Anti-racism and racial justice is a key pillar to that. It is not the only pillar. We need to think about climate justice too, and we need to think about economic justice. And in fact, all three of those things often interweave in important ways, powerful ways, complex ways. So I think it's right to think about as we take steps forward, whether it's ordinances, whether it's budget decisions or others, we think through the impact in all of these ways. Is it anti-racist? Is it protecting? Is it helping us do what we should do for climate? Is it creating more economic justice and opportunity? And I think all those are really important. And maybe some of those longer term questions can be part of some of the longer term discussions about how to implement that on a day-to-day basis. And I look forward to working with the council on that for sure.
Okay, thanks. So we have a question from a Facebook watcher, Pamela Bessler, who said she just joined at the half hour, but she's wondering how in your department, Chief Diekhoff, you hold officers accountable for racist acts or excessive violence, things of that nature. And have you ever fired or prosecuted an officer for those actions?
So we have a complaint process that citizens can file complaints if they were the receiver of any of those types of things. There's multiple ways people can file a complaint. They can file it in the city's legal department, in the mayor's office, online. With the police department, there's a kiosk in the lobby of City Hall where you can file complaints. So that's one way to do it. We also do periodic reviews of body cam videos to see, how officers are behaving on calls, and so that's kind of the complaint process. That's how we do it. So if we would get a complaint, it is investigated by different supervisors. Those supervisors then have their investigation reviewed by a board of lieutenants that send their results to captains and the deputy chief, who then send it to me. It also is reported to the Board of Safety that there was an incident, a complaint, and what happened with it. So the Board of Safety also reviews that. The Board of Safety also has the authority to conduct their own investigations if they deem that necessary. And so there's multiple ways to report it. There's a thorough investigation process, and then there is a reporting process in the end to the Board of Safety as to what we found. As to have we ever fired or prosecuted an officer for those actions, we have terminated officers in the past, but to my knowledge, there has never been an officer that has been prosecuted.
Right. Okay, the next two questions come from Facebook, and they're somewhat related. And I think that these are for Mayor Hamilton. They have to do with your announcement of the advisory committee to the Board of Public Works that you've proposed today. So No Space for Hate asks who would be on the advisory committee and who decides who's on that advisory committee. And then in a related question, another watcher, Danielle Bird, says the advisory committee to the farmers market wasn't very effective. I wonder that we're passing the buck to the advisory committee. It's important that the city take responsibility and not pass the buck.
Thanks for those questions and comments. I'm planning to ask the Board of Public Safety to undertake this effort in the role of their oversight of our public safety departments. Under state law, they are responsible to oversee the departments. They're designed to be residents of the community. That board for us is a very diverse board of 5 individuals who are assembled to oversee those departments. And I will be asking that group to pick an advisory committee, to assemble it, to name the folks to it. I expect there will be numbers of people whose names won't be surprising, representing interests, groups, advocacy groups who've been active in this. But I'm not going to be stepping into assigning that role. Certainly the city administration has deep responsibility. I feel it personally, and I know as a city administration we do, to promote justice, to promote anti-racism, to take responsibility for this work. But I also think the community wants to have and should have a direct role in participating in this. And I don't know that it's the exact right approach. There may be different ways and we can think about them, but I believe asking the Board of Public Safety, which is already a resident board, to create an advisory board, to assemble it, populate it, and then to oversee its operations, to report to them, actually gives some insulation from the administration and maybe some independence, which can be useful as they're looking at lots of different options. So that's at least, I think, one plan to go forward, and we certainly welcome ideas for others.
Okay, thank you. This question comes from Councilmember Sandberg, Susan Sandberg, who asks, from last year's budget discussion, in which it was almost unanimous that we review the need for more police officers, there was a study underway by consultants to help us in that examination of community need for public safety. I understand, she writes, there is a draft of that report. And when will we get the benefit of that study to add to the current discussions?
I'm happy to take that. And thank you, Councilmember Sandberg, for that. There is a draft of that report. That report was kind of done pre-COVID, mid-COVID, and it is, I actually haven't seen it, I don't believe, that draft, but it is in draft form. I do expect it'll be available at some point in the weeks or months ahead, short months, I don't know for sure. And it certainly can inform the current discussions and should. It was done by a third party reviewing the police department. So it's another voice to listen to, and we'll look forward to sharing that in the months ahead, weeks and months. I'm not sure exactly the status of it.
Okay, thank you. This question comes from Facebook as well. This may be for Chief Diekhoff, or it may be more broader than that. Danielle Bird asks, what happened to the funding for Shalom's street outreach? Yeah.
I'm guessing that question is referring to some of the DRO grants that we do, and the decision was made because from what I understand, there was some I think personnel changes at Shalom at the time that this was going through with their outreach people, and we ended up funding Centerstone. Also had outreach professionals that they applied for, and we ended up funding the Centerstone portion of the street outreach workers. Shalom did get some funding for, I believe it was for some of the bus tickets and I don't remember exactly what else they got funding for, but they did get some funding from the DRO grant program.
Okay, thank you. Now this is a question from Facebook as well, from Jada B. She asks, will you commit to not hiring any new officers? Also asks, will you commit to selling the Bearcat, the armored vehicle, and reinvest that money in the Black community. She asks also, will you commit to removing the body cam fee? Will you commit to removing your officers from the schools? You might have to write this down. Will you stop harassing our homeless population? Will you stop patrols of cops looking for trouble? All of these are progressive moves. Everything you're mentioning were outdated modes of policing 50 years ago, she asserts.
Well, thanks for the questions and comments. I'm sure I won't remember all of those, but we're happy to continue to receive input and suggestions as we have. As we indicated, the proposal that we'll be bringing to the council for police officers will be reallocating the budget from 5 sworn officers into at least 5 new positions for non-sworn mix of social worker, neighborhood resource specialists, and the like. That will mean the police department will have 100 funded sworn officers for 2021. If the council approves that, it's up to the council to approve that. And within that number, I would expect the police department to continue to recruit, train, and hire officers to provide the necessary forces and on the street. It's probably important, and Chief Diekhoff can amplify this, but when we say we have 100 officers, actually at any given hour or day or time in our community, there's really a range between 8 to 12 officers on duty typically, and it takes that many officers, as Chief Diekhoff said, for a 24/7 operation, and with training that takes people off duty, and with injuries, and with vacations, and all those other matters. So I'm committed to continuing to support that. Now, as to the armored rescue vehicle, and we've had a lot of discussion about that, I do not plan to sell that or recommend the selling of that vehicle. I believe it has proven to be very important, as we've projected it to be, to protect our officers and our community in very dangerous situations. I sometimes remind people there are probably something like 150,000 privately owned firearms in Monroe County. If we're anywhere near the national average, our officers and our public are sometimes subject to very dangerous situations. And that vehicle has been used under very strict conditions set by the council and affirmed in the general orders. And I think it saves lives and helps assure that we have the capacity to respond to situations that we would want to respond to appropriately. There are lots of other recommendations that are shared, and happy to consider those. Those are the kind of things that, again, the Board of Public Safety review and others will continue to look at, kind of the longer term plans. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that. They're welcome to jump in too.
I guess not. We are coming on the end of the hour, but there are 2 questions that we have here. One is a clarification question from the B Square Beacon for the mayor. The B Square Beacon asks, early in Mayor Hamilton's remarks, he mentioned a task force with 5 citizen members. That's different from the advisory committee to the Board of Public Safety. I think he's talking about the group that went up to Chicago. Not sure.
There is a Board of Public Safety, which is a state statutory entity that has 5 members, 5 resident members that oversees the Board of Public Safety. That is different from the advisory committee. I am asking them to name of an unknown size that would advise that Board of Public Safety. Maybe it was confusing. I did mention that the Divided Communities Initiative had a total of 8 people, 3 of whom were city residents and 5 of whom were 3 of whom were city employees and 5 of whom were resident members. That's a different group of 5, but we'll try to clarify that if there needs to be any more addition to that. Thanks.
Yeah, the nomenclature can be confusing, and so this next question may also speak to that, the different names that we have for things. So Vox Booker asks us, has our community explored the creation of an independent civilian review board, which is a term we've heard a lot in the last few months? Not sure if that's what we consider our Board of Public Safety to be, or if that's what we consider our advisory board to the Board of Public Safety to be?
Well, I know Councilmember Sims, we've had discussions about this issue. I think it's a good question. I do believe under Indiana state law, the Board of Public Safety is meant to be the kind of like a civilian review board. Under state law, the mayor appoints resident members. They have quite independent responsibility, but within the boundaries of state law and others, and sometimes those can change. I think I'm open to thinking about what is the best way to manage this. I think we have a very good review board operating now in the Board of Public Safety, and Councilmember Sims, you may have views on this too. I know you've thought about it.
I have, and first thing I'd like to say is that I served on the Board of Public Safety for almost 8 years. So I have a little bit of knowledge of kind of the history of where we've come. And again, we still have farther to go, but now I have discussed individually in many cases the concept of an independent civilian review board. Now, part of that exploration is having our legal folks obviously look into the code and the state code regarding to our Board of Public Safety, and what are some of the issues that we have to navigate in order to create a true independent civilian review board. It will take some time, and yes, that will continue to be our discussion. And I'm not the only council person who have discussed that. We haven't done it as a group, are those discussions. But what is its effectiveness? What can it legally do? I do know that what the mayor has proposed is something that can happen a lot quicker. And I think we can develop some of its responsibilities, some of its strengths, if you will, in order to work with the Board of Public Safety. And that's what I'm looking for initially, a true representative group of the community. I do understand that the Board of Public Safety is that, I consider that, but we also know the perception, I'm not so sure how correct it is, but since those are all 5 mayoral appointments, it somehow gives you the perception that these are political people. These are independent folks in the community who care to do a job. So anything else that could assist them in working on some of the issues in our community, I think is a good deal at this time, at least until we determine what's the best way to do a more independent civilian review board. And maybe we'll find that that may not necessarily be what we need.
Very good. Thank you, Councilmember Sims. And thank you to our really active audience. We have more questions than we even have time for today. And we had told you we would only take an hour of your day. So I would like to thank everyone who has participated today, and then I'll pass it over to our mayor. Community and Family Resources Department Director, Beverly Calender-Anderson, thank you so much. Our Police Chief, Mike Diekhoff, Councilmember Jim Sims, and then to you, Mayor Hamilton, I'd like to let you close out this conversation.
Well, thank you, Ms. Cassander, and thanks to all of you panelists, and Jim, say hi to Doris. We know she's on the mend there, so I hope she's getting better. I just want to say thank you for all participating. I think there were some important points. One, Ms. Calender-Anderson identifying the citywide structural racism efforts underway, including a new task force on that. The request for a Board of Public Safety Advisory Commission focused on some longer term questions, and then specifically from Chief Diekhoff, some of the outlining of not only what the police department has done, but what it plans to do in the relatively short order as we go forward. This is a big issue. It's a real issue. Democracy is not a state, it is an act. Anti-racism is our acts, and we have a lot of work still to do, but I really appreciate the way our community pulls together, advocates for these changes, and hopefully supports them as we move forward. So thanks for everybody participating, fellow panelists, and I think that's the sign off. Thanks a lot.